Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something that's been getting a lot of attention lately, microdosing.
Oh, yeah.
And specifically, we're going to try to figure out if it's really a legit tool for boosting creativity or if it's mostly hype and the placebo effect.
You know, it's a pretty interesting concept, right? This idea that just tiny bits of psychedelics could unlock hidden creative potential.
Right.
But it's really important to separate the science from the speculation here.
Yeah, definitely. And we've got a lot to dig through today, like research articles, surveys, personal stories. I'm really curious to see what kind of conclusions we can draw.
Yeah, me too.
So maybe we can start with like the basics. What exactly are we talking about when we say microdosing?
So microdosing is when you take super small doses of psychedelics, like way less than what would make you trip. You're mainly talking LSD or psilocybin here.
Okay.
And the goal is to get those kind of subtle boosts in thinking and perception, but without the whole like intense psychedelic trip.
So it's not about like a total mind-bending experience, right?
No.
You're just looking for like slight changes.
Subtle shifts. Yeah, exactly. And one of the areas where people think microdosing might have an effect is creativity.
Okay.
Like a lot of people say it can help you think outside the box, come up with new solutions, generate fresh ideas, all that stuff.
And that's where this default mode network or DMN thing comes in, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I've heard that microdosing can mess with that network in the brain, but I'll admit I don't really get it.
Right.
Could you break that down a bit?
Sure. So the DMN, it's basically a bunch of brain regions that are active when our minds are kind of just wandering, when we're daydreaming, thinking about ourselves, or just caught up in that inner monologue we all have.
So it's kind of like our brain on autopilot.
Yeah, good way to put it. And it's super important for a lot of things like memory, knowing who we are and how we interact with people. But some research suggests is that too much activity in this network can actually get in the way of creativity.
Oh, really?
It's like you get stuck in a mental rut. The same thoughts and patterns just keep playing over and over.
Yeah. I definitely know that feeling of like hitting a wall creatively.
Exactly.
So how is microdosing supposed to like change the DMN then?
Okay, well, the research on microdosing itself is still pretty limited.
Okay.
But studies with full doses of psychedelics like psilocybin have shown that they can make the DMN less active.
Interesting.
Robin Carhart Harris, who's a big researcher in this field, he thinks that by lowering activity in the DMN, psychedelics might let information in the brain flow more freely.
Oh, okay. So instead of being trapped in those same old thought patterns, your brain can make new connections.
Exactly. And that increased flexibility might be the reason people report feeling more creative when microdosing. Like imagine shaking up a snow globe, it lets all those new patterns and perspectives come to the surface.
That's a cool way to think about it. And it kind of fits with what some people say about being in the zone or finding flow when they microdose.
Right.
They talk about feeling more present in the moment, more connected to what they're doing, and like ideas just come to them easier.
Yeah, that's definitely something worth looking into more. But it's important to remember we still don't fully understand how microdosing affects the brain.
Right.
And whether these feelings actually mean real changes in creativity.
So we're still figuring it all out.
We're definitely in the early stages of research here.
But even if the science is still catching up, there are tons of people saying they're getting real benefits, especially when it comes to creativity.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories out there, but we can't just take those at face value.
Right. We need more solid proof.
We need the science to back it up.
Which kind of brings us to the main question we're trying to answer with this deep dive. Is microdosing actually a hack for unlocking creativity?
Yeah, is it the real deal or just hype?
Or is it just hype?
Right. To figure that out, we got to dive into the research.
Okay.
Both on microdosing itself and on psychedelics more broadly. We have to look at the evidence objectively, look at the possible risks, the legal stuff, the ethical side of things.
Okay, so let's start unpacking all of that. What does the research tell us about the benefits of microdosing? Like, how does it affect mood, focus, and of course, creativity?
So when we're talking about research on microdosing, we're dealing with a pretty new area of study here. There have been a few preliminary studies, mostly surveys and just observations,
Yeah.
And those have turned up some interesting results.
Oh, okay. Like, what are some examples of the benefits that researchers have seen?
Well, one study that comes to mind is this survey of people who microdose. They reported improvements in their mood, focus, and creativity.
Interesting.
Over 90% of them said their mood got better.
Wow.
And a good chunk also mentioned feeling more focused and productive.
That's pretty impressive. But it's got to be hard to know for sure, right?
Yeah.
Like how much of that is actually from the microdosing and how much is just like the placebo effect?
You're totally right. It's tough to draw like rock solid conclusions just from what people tell you. They could be misinterpreting things, or their expectations might be influencing how they feel.
Right.
That's why we really need more rigorous studies, like controlled trials to really isolate the specific effects of microdosing.
Yeah, to rule out those other factors.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that even if these benefits are real, they're probably not going to be the same for everyone.
Okay, so it can vary from person to person.
Yeah, for sure.
What kind of things might affect how someone responds to microdosing?
Oh, there are a ton of variables. The specific substance they're using, the dose, individual brain chemistry, personality, even the setting they're in can all make a difference.
It's not one size fits all.
Nope, not at all.
Okay, so let's get back to the creativity thing for a sec. Are there any studies that have specifically looked at how microdosing affects creative thinking?
There have been a handful of small studies that have tried to measure this.
Okay.
Some of them found small improvements in what we call divergent thinking tasks.
What's that?
It's basically where we have to come up with multiple solutions to a problem.
Oh, okay.
So there are some hints of potential there, but we need a lot more research to back it up.
Yeah, we need to confirm those findings.
Exactly. And we got to be careful about reading too much into these early studies.
Right.
The samples are often small, and the methods they use can be all over the place.
Okay.
It's just too soon to say for sure if microdosing can really boost creativity in a way we can measure.
Okay, I get it. So the scientific evidence is kind of iffy right now.
Yeah, kinda.
But what about all those stories we hear about?
Oh, yeah.
Like artists, entrepreneurs, tech people using microdosing to get more creative? There's got to be something to that, right?
Those stories are super interesting, and they show how much interest there is in using microdosing for creativity.
Right.
But stories aren't the same as scientific proof.
Yeah, fair enough. We can't just believe everything we hear.
Exactly.
But is there a way to make sense of those stories even though we don't have solid scientific evidence yet?
Well, there could be a few things happening here. Like we talked about before, the placebo effect could be playing a big role.
Oh, yeah.
If people think microdosing will make them more creative, they might actually start acting and thinking in ways that make that happen without even realizing it.
So our brains can kind of trick us into being more creative.
In a way, yeah. The mind is incredibly powerful. Our beliefs can really change our bodies and our behavior. Another possibility is that microdosing might be helping creativity indirectly by boosting mood and lowering anxiety.
Okay, so instead of directly making you more creative,
Right.
it's kind of creating the right mental conditions for creative work to happen.
That's one theory. When we're anxious or stressed, our brains tend to get stuck in these negative loops,
Right.
and that can fuel creativity.
Yeah, totally.
So if microdosing helps to calm those negative emotions, it might free up space for more creative thinking.
That makes a lot of sense. And we already know from other research that things like mindfulness and meditation can help with creativity. And those also work by reducing stress and anxiety. So maybe microdosing is doing something similar.
It's possible, but we need more research to really tease apart all these factors and see how it all works.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget about the risks and the ethical stuff around microdosing.
Right. That's a big part of this whole conversation. What are some of the potential downsides that people should know about before they even think about trying microdosing? I think it's super important to talk about the risks here, because even though the potential benefits of microdosing sound kind of cool, we have to be real about the downsides too, right?
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest concerns is that there's no real regulation around microdosing.
Okay.
It's in this legal gray area in most places, so there's no way to control the quality of what people are taking.
So you're saying there's no guarantee that it's pure?
Yeah, and you don't know if you're getting the right dosage.
Right.
Which is a huge problem because even tiny changes in the dose can have really different effects.
Wow.
Plus, there's always that risk of contamination
Ooh.
or getting the wrong substance altogether, which could have some pretty bad consequences.
Yeah, that's scary. It seems like being careful is super important, especially since we don't have any long-term studies on the effects of microdosing.
That's right. We just don't have enough info yet to understand how it might affect brain health or mental well-being in the long run.
Right.
It's crucial to remember that psychedelics, even in small amounts, can have some pretty strong effects on your mind. So you shouldn't just mess around with them.
Definitely not. What about addiction?
Oh.
Is that something people need to worry about with microdosing?
The risk of getting addicted seems pretty low. The doses are so small that they don't usually cause the euphoria that leads to addiction.
Okay.
But it's still possible, especially for people who are already prone to addiction or who have had problems with substance abuse in the past.
Okay, so there are definitely some individual factors to consider.
Yeah, for sure.
What would you say is the most responsible way for someone to explore microdosing if they're curious about it?
The first thing is to do your homework.
Okay.
Really learn about it, understand the potential benefits and risks, the legal stuff, and how to find a safe source if they decide to try it.
Right.
It's also a good idea to talk to a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they have any mental health conditions or if they're taking meds.
Yeah, that makes sense. Education, talk to a professional, be cautious.
Right.
So where does all this leave us? Like, are we any closer to figuring out if microdosing is a legitimate way to boost creativity?
Honestly, I think the answer is we're not totally sure yet.
Okay.
The research is still pretty new, and we need more studies to give us a definitive answer. The stories people tell are definitely interesting.
Yeah.
And there are some early studies that suggest there might be something there, but we have to separate the hype from the science.
Right.
And wait for more data before we can say anything for sure.
I agree. It seems like microdosing is a super interesting area to explore. It has a lot of potential, but there are some real concerns too.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess it's a good reminder that there are no shortcuts when it comes to creativity.
Right. Nothing's going to magically make you a creative genius overnight.
Exactly. Real creativity comes from putting in the work, being dedicated, being willing to try new things, and having a good support system.
Exactly. And while microdosing might help some people be more creative, it's definitely not the only way to get there.
Well said. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. This has been a fascinating deep dive into a really complex topic.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep those minds curious, and remember that the best discoveries often come from just trying to learn new things. See you next time.